Do you know who Oklahoma's tight ends coach is, Alex?
I do, because someone was recently in their football office and informed me that they saw this guy. And I was like, wait, he didn't play there. What's the deal? This was a fun one.
Former Dallas Cowboy and Tennessee Volunteer Jason Witten is the tight ends coach at Oklahoma. So why I think the Oklahoma tight ends room is so interesting is because if you're not really aware of what's happening in the NFL right now from a personnel standpoint.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Richard Johnson. I'm Alex Kirshner. This is a new episode of Split Zone Duo, a podcast about college football. Richard, how are you?
I'm doing well. Knicks just lost game 3 as we record this. So hopefully but here's my problem. So if the Knicks win this in 5, I'm not going to be here. I'm not going to be in town this weekend. So I actually now need the Knicks to win. They can win game 4 if they want, but I need the Knicks to not win game 5 and hopefully best case scenario win game 6, which I believe is next Tuesday or Wednesday, which would then create the scenario that I want, which is me being in the city for the Knicks winning. Also the Knicks winning in New York City versus winning it in San Antonio.
It was just last week on this very podcast that you said the real NBA finals had just happened.
Yeah.
In Oklahoma City.
We missed the mark on that one, I would say. Not an NBA podcast, as you'll note, but Split Zone Duo Basketball Hour right now. Yeah, man, I did not think the Knicks were going to come out and get the job done like they did in games 1 and 2. It was really exciting, and it's taken the city by storm. I am obviously not a Knicks fan. I'm not a real Knicks fan. I am happy that the city is happy, and the vibes are just off the charts. Like, you cannot, like, it is one of the things that, like, I'm just going to sound awful when I say it, but, like, if you're not here and you don't get it, like, I don't know how else to explain it.
I
like,
can sense it, even from afar. I think it's cool.
Tremendous.
I think it's cool. I was talking about this with one of my Slate editors because I was thinking about blogging about this, because who better to blog about what's happening in New York than someone in Los Angeles, the only other city, as we like to say.
Yeah, of course.
I think it's a combination of things. And a key thing that you can't overstate is that they haven't done this in a while.
Yeah, they've sucked forever.
You can't replicate that.
Exactly.
You can't replicate that except by sucking for another several decades.
Yes.
And you combine that with the likability of the players on that team. Did you know a couple of them actually were roommates? They went to Villanova.
Yes,
Not many people know that. Also,
college football fans will relate to this, I think, when we talk about the Knicks. CAA put the Knicks together too. Like, they are all CAA clients and free agents. Even the guys, Jalen Brunson's dad, who was an assistant coach on this team, which is just incredible. Incredible how they put this team together. It's really quite something. But yeah, they're pretty decently likable from all accounts. It's really cool. And New York City. So the Yankees, as we know, on their own stratosphere. Sure. I tend to think Mets fans are stolen valor, shucks people. Like, you've won 2 World Series.
Yeah.
You
agreed.
go often. You go to the playoffs often. This is not a Cubs situation. This is not a Red Sox situation. I understand in comparison to the Yankees, just like pretty much every other Major League Baseball team, you have not had much historic success. But I cannot stand when Mets fans do the, like, woe is me stuff. Jets fans, all right, folks, you guys you guys got it. Congrats. Giants fans, like, extremely lucky to have ran into, like, the 2 specific Super Bowls that they have. But, like, the Rangers are right now pretty bad. Every team, since I've been here, every team's been bad to middling. Like,
except the Yankees.
Well, yeah, except the Yankees.
Yeah.
This Knicks run is really the first and only, I would say, and I think it is specific to the Knicks, the, like, uniting quality of the city. Because Yankees and Mets are split, Jets and Giants are split, you don't get a split like this where half the city would, like, kind of not care and the other half is energized. Everybody's energized right now, and it's really, really cool. This is, I think the second time that I've kind of experienced a place in which I live really rallying around the home team as it makes a significant championship run.
Yeah.
And it's been interesting to do this again in adulthood, in a place that I didn't grow up in a place that I don't really have ties to, that I get to see kind of a third party, just see everybody be really happy and excited and in the city.
The joy that Knicks fans are emanating right now, I'm surrounded by a lot of them. I live in a part of Los Angeles where it's just a ton of New York people. And the joy that just comes off them is pretty cool. I also think there's a fun thing happening with these playoffs that also happens with the baseball playoffs and with the hockey playoffs at different times, which is that a series, which we don't have in football, single elimination playoffs, just does interesting things to the fans' minds psychologically. At the beginning of the series, if you said Knicks in 6, pretty popular take for a Knicks fan, Knicks in 6, Knicks are 7, you would say, okay, Knicks are going to win 6. I feel good about that. But then they lose game 3. You have to lose 2 games for that to happen. It's might as well go play in traffic. It's very interesting because of the highs and lows that you ride over the course of a series in the sports that have series-oriented postseasons. We do not have that in ours.
Yet. Don't put it past them.
Honestly, don't put it past them. Careful. You're right about that. So yeah, Knicks fans happy for. Also Spurs fans, you guys exist too. I like Wemby. I think it's interesting how when the 8-foot tall guys out there, the Knicks seem to have a harder time making shots.
Yeah, it does seem like there's a corollary as far as it is very, very funny watching, like specifically Jalen Brunson, obviously because Jalen Brunson is the shortest one of them. Jalen Brunson drive the lane and just like back out.
Yeah.
Like it's
sorry, man.
U-turn. It's so funny.
I didn't mean it. Let me take this thing back out to the 3-point line. That's a splits into a basketball hour. Richard, we're going to talk about college football, the sport that we usually talk about on this program. It is season preview season of season preview season. We are not yet into conference previews. Those will begin, as always, in July. But now that it's June, we are starting to move towards a more offensive posture, looking towards the season to come, talking a little bit more about actual ball and also, yes, legal decisions when they come down. One of the things that we're going to talk about leading up to the season to get ourselves more familiar, to get our audience more familiar, is transfers. And specifically ones that we think are really interesting for how they fit into the arcs of the programs that they're coming to, that they are leaving. We have compiled a list of, I'll count before I put this show up so that we can put the right title on the episode, but of 20 plus transfers this offseason who we think are really interesting in one way or another. We have done this in the past. This will not just be a recitation of the top 25 players on the portal rankings who changed teams last offseason. This offseason, this is going to be a collection of guys that we think are really interesting, trying to figure out situations where players are filling unique roles, where teams are either paying up big or making money ball bets that look compelling to us, or just flat out addressing problems that they need to address because they were bad last year. This is the second time that we have done this. Richard, do you want to hazard any guesses as to the players we highlighted going into 2025? Check our work a little bit.
I knew the one that I wasn't surprised to see was Jaden Ott. I knew that Jaden Ott was going to be on there. I thought he was going to rush for like 2,000 yards last year.
Dude,
God, who was the other? There was another running back one that we whiffed on.
Oregon Mekhi Hughes.
Yes.
He actually could be on this list again this year. I'm not going back to the well. He's at Houston, reunited with Willie Fritz, his coach at Tulane. I once again think he'll be good. But yeah, we both whiffed big time on thinking that there were these sure thing running backs going to blue blood programs last year. Both programs made the playoff anyway, but needless to say, it didn't really work out for Jaden Ott at Oklahoma.
Literally without them.
Yeah, basically without them doing anything, or with them in Ott's case in like very spot duty, but passed on the depth chart a couple of times over. Richard, you highlighted the Clemson guys as Dabo finally broke the glass on the portal device, and you were particularly interested in Will Helt. That aged well. He's still there. He was one of their best players last year in a disappointing season. Edge, who came over from Purdue. I highlighted a couple of Michigan defensive tackle transfers who did not really move the needle. I correctly predicted that Dylan Thieneman would be a star at Oregon coming over from Purdue, though that one was pretty easy. And you highlighted Bear Alexander on Oregon, who also had a better year than he kind of started to live up to his promise. We had a bit of a whiff on Malachi Fields to Notre Dame. Kind of funny. He got a case of that, what I would call Notre Dame wideout syndrome. where he went to Notre Dame and immediately had his worst season in 3 years, and then just went to the NFL and became a third-round pick, more or less like you would have expected when he went to Notre Dame. You were smart. You highlighted Pat Coogan, the center who transferred from Notre Dame to Indiana. That one worked out well. And there were other weird ones. There were some slam dunks mixed in. We told you David Bailey would be good for Texas Tech. No one else could have told you that.
No one heard it here first and only. Splits on Dual College Football Podcast.
That is a preview of the way that this will work. We are going to aim to be creative about this. And like I said, not just read off the top names on the portal list. Before we do, though, I want to say thank you to our partners at Nokian Tires. Nokian wants you to tell them about the dream road trips that you've got plotted out this summer. They can be real or they can be imagined. Go to nokiantires.com/guide. It's Nokian Tires with a Y to enter your destination, and you will be entered to win some Nokian Tires swag. Get inspired at Nokian Tires NA with ambassador content, practical tips for your summer driving, highlights from the best entries. That's right. You can even make up where you're going. And our man Wes Bowling and the team at Nokian Tires will not come down on you hard for that. I also want to say thank you very much to our partners at Homefield, the best in the land for premium, officially licensed vintage and vintage-inspired college sports gear. Homefield has a robust summer release calendar charted out. You know they only do it big or they don't do it at all at Homefield. So you're going to want to keep yourself well apprised via Homefield social accounts and by regularly going, as any good citizen would, to homefieldapparel.com all throughout the summer. The game day patch trucker hats are out now for those of you who value both a little bit of shade for your eyes and a cool head. Not a metaphoric cool head, but temperature-wise a cool head. You can find those right now at homefieldapparel.com. Maybe you can get some apparel to enter into the transfer portal, aka the U.S. Postal Service, and come to your home. Richard, should we talk about the non-postal service transfers of the offseason?
Yeah, when we talked about we talked about not running down the 247 top 25 portal guys. I am going to start with, I believe, our number one non-quarterback transfer, which is Cam Coleman, wide receiver at Texas, who I really and truly cannot wait to watch this guy. It's going to be, I think he is going to, I'm pretty sure he's in the extremely early mock drafts, like a second or third round pick. Like, it's not like this guy's like falling off the face of the earth, but in the sort of eternal triumvirate that is Jeremiah Smith, Brian Coleman Williams, and Cam Coleman, you have the situation where they all came into college at the same time. Obviously, Coleman Williams and Jeremiah Smith, their freshman years, they take off. And then Coleman kind of doesn't really do a ton. Now, there's some Auburn in there. And that really comes to the fore in all of their sophomore seasons. So now he's out of Auburn. He's at Texas. 1,200 yards, 12 touchdowns. That seems like reasonable. And that's crazy.
I do think that if he does not clear 1,000 yards, you would look at this and think, that could have gone better. You would hope that he would be in 4 digits this year with everything about that situation.
There's just no way the connection won't be there. And there's just no way that the connection won't take Texas offensively to the heights that they expect. Now, obviously, we got to figure out the offensive line, whatever. We'll talk about that. But it's just the slam dunk. Just has to be if he stays healthy, as we know.
You're braver than me. I'm not calling anything a slam dunk this year after the Ott situation last year, but you're braver than me, and I don't want to discourage you from having a point of view. I'm also going to go, I think my list is a little bit more diving down into the depths of the rankings than yours, though you did not just pick the top guys. I am going to start with a pair of transfers that are going to the same position room, which is the Nebraska defensive line. The number 53 interior defensive lineman, according to 24/7 Sports, and the number 109 portal defensive lineman. That is Jasir Whittington from Pitt goes to Nebraska, and Owen Stoudemire from Boston College goes to Nebraska. Richard, I think that people miss this a little bit, and I was looking through my personal stats dashboard in the run-up to this episode. If I were to ask you, what do you think was the biggest problem for Nebraska football last year? You would say what?
The offensive line, and Pavlovian response to that question.
Right. You would say the offensive line and or the underperformance of the quarterback who is now at Oregon. because of some mixture of his own disappointing play and not being protected. That's what you would say. But statistically speaking, actually, the ugliest part of that team's profile last year, where I see the most red on my dashboard, is in the rush defense. They were in the 3rd percentile nationally. That's not good. There's 97 percentiles ahead of that in rush EPA allowed per play. They were around the 17th in stuff rate defensively and the 20th in explosive play rate allowed on the ground. I bring all this up to say that they just got gashed all year long. Couldn't stop anybody. Hard thing to win if you can't stop anybody. They have added these guys who are kind of in that like mid upper 3-star range to come in and join like a 11 or 12 deep defensive tackle group. Whittington was a depth piece at Pitt, but he was fun. They called him the bread man. He has 3 years of eligibility left, so he is a developmental prospect for Nebraska too. And Stoudemire comes over. He's a 5th-year guy from Boston College. Before he played 3 games there last year, got hurt, was done for the year. Part of that disastrous season they had, but he played. I think he's actually a 6th-year guy. Had a 5-year run at Boston College. Filled some stat sheets over his time there. Not a huge guy. He's like 6'1", 290, but we'll see if he gets beefed up a little bit playing in the Big Ten. They added an edge transfer, one of the more highly ranked ones in the country, Anthony Jones from UCLA. I think that a lot of the attention that a lot of people are going to give to Nebraska's offseason, including us probably when we do the preview, is talking about Anthony Colandrea and about them trying to rebuild that offensive line. But it only matters if they can avoid getting run through all year long. And they seem to be relying on high school development and on, I'm not going to say dumpster diving because that's not fair about 3-star type guys who are transferring from other power conference programs, but looking a little bit for diamonds in the rough to try to shore up the interior defensive line. And my God, they need it because it was absolutely ugly last year.
Next one is, I think it's going to have the most impact as far as helping a great player out. We talked all season last season about how Malachi Toney was doing it all himself. I mean, it just, in that wide receiver room, there was just, and they, to be honest with you, they're pretty damn lucky he stepped on campus as the finished article in the way that he did.
Yeah.
And what they did was they added Cooper Barkett from Duke, who I think is going to really just be like a sure hand for this offense in the passing game with Darren Mensah. I don't think Cam Vaughn is also a transfer that is interesting for them as well, who I do think has some stretch of field ability, yada, yada, yada. But I have some questions. I am not the biggest Darren Mensah guy on planet Earth. I have some serious questions about his arm strength still. I had some serious questions about Carson Beck's arm strength too, and look what happened last season. Came basically within a possession of winning the national championship. So, but I do think that Cooper Barkett gives this offense, this passing offense, another dimension, which is you don't just have to have Malachi Toney bail you out with an incredible screen pass that he houses for 78 yards because he's just
Glad you said that. Richard, the Miami wide receiver group is going to be inverse racially profiled this year.
Tremendous. Love to see it.
Malachi Toney, unbelievable athlete, but they throw him screens and slants and just say, catch it and figure it out.
Yeah.
Whereas Cooper Barkett, a white guy named Cooper who comes from Duke via the Ivy League, I'm sure you're shocked, has a different skin complexion than Malachi Toney. But Cooper Barkett is going to be the deep guy. People are going to probably misstate what they think of these guys' skill sets because of, the Wes Welkerisms and the Adam Thielenisms of wide receiver evaluation and certain laziness in player evaluation. But yeah, I think Barkett is their deep and intermediate guy, and Toney is the guy who gets the ball within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage and runs as far as he can.
Yeah, I'm in on how this is going to work. For my main offense, obviously you're bringing Mark Fletcher back. You're going to have to replace some stuff on the offensive line, but let's see if Jackson Cantwell is really as he is billed at left tackle. But as far as just fits to elevate rooms, in a sense, like what free agency is used for at its best, like Miami's use of the portal to go get Cooper Parkgate is just something that we're keeping tabs on, monitoring the situation this season.
Situation is being monitored. We are keeping a robust eye on what is happening at Miami. I am going to go back to the defensive line and talk about a junior college edge rusher from vaunted Iowa Western, probably the best program in junior college football. Andy Berberija is going to Clemson after first committing to the school that I just talked about, Nebraska. Clemson last year had a win in the portal with Will Helt. They get this player this year who had 11 sacks in JUCO last year for an elite program, 18 and a half tackles for loss at that level. I call him an edge, but he is a listed 6'5", 290, which seems to me like he could be a tweener. Clemson has had, and I'm curious for your thought on this. To my eye, they have liked tweeners on the defensive front seven, really throughout Dabo's time there, including when times were good. Most famous example is Isaiah Simmons at sort of a linebacker, box safety, nickelback thing, but also on the defensive line. Like what was Christian Wilkins at Clemson exactly? Like what was Peter Woods at Clemson the last couple of years? Like they like these guys who they can use as three techs and as defensive ends, depending on the situation.
You go back to like Clelin Ferrell.
Yep.
Back to on the championship teams. You can go back for.
If you think about it, they have had, and they had Dexter Lawrence, for example, who's, you're not putting him at edge. He's just this big fella in the middle, more of a Vince Wilfork type of defensive tackle who will line up over the center and kick his ass. But Clemson has had a lot of success with these types of defensive line athletes who they can do different things with. And to my eye, it seems like this JUCO transfer is going to be into that lineage this year. I think they're actually going to play him because he had committed to Nebraska during the portal period. I don't know that it got to the point of, I don't know where it got in terms of papers being signed and whatnot, but he committed to Nebraska and then flipped to Clemson. Certainly I would never accuse anyone at Clemson of doing anything untoward, obviously. But I'm interested to see what he does with them this year, especially because even as things were going badly for that program last year, defensive line evaluation wasn't the problem. We just talked about Will Helt, who came over from Purdue, who was a really good player for that team. I think I would buy some stock in this player. Not literally, which you now have to specify when you're talking about athletes, but I think he's got an opportunity to play a lot for them and be good. Iowa Western.
Third on my draft board, as it were here, I'm going to go Coy Parrish, Minnesota's safety, who's going to Oregon. He basically is doing the Dylan Thieneman. At really good Big Ten safety, going to another Big Ten school. It's one of those things where you look at it and you're like, all right, I think when you look at what Oregon has up front, you're like, man, you could have any four guys back there behind them and they're going to be fine because you're not really going to be getting deep into the snap count here with what Oregon has up front rushing the passer still this year. They bring basically that whole front four back, Maury Washington, Bray Alexander, Mateo Uyunglele, and Tuioti. It's the whole crew.
How are all of those guys back?
I'm saying.
Yeah.
Derek Brown does not come back, but it's the whole squad. The whole squad's coming back. So you've got Brandon Finney on the outside, who's tremendous as a young player. And Parrish marshaling on in the middle of the field, I think can really have an effect for them. I do think that Parrish, he was one of the guys who coach, I have another guy on my list too, but he was one of the guys who coming into the season, the coaches pretended like he was going to do a Travis Hunter thing and play a bunch of off. That was very in vogue during training camp last year. And then like pretty much nobody did it. So he was that player for them. He had a truckload of interceptions his freshman year in 2024. He's going crazy. I think he even had a game ender in one of the games that they played. And then in 2025, that number tailed off as it is wont to do because turnovers are a little cyclical, but he can still play. And I think you plug and play him into Oregon on the back end and you're going to have something.
I'm going to go to the group of six now, which tends to be talked about less in terms of interesting transfers for obvious reasons, because there's more outbound traffic than inbound traffic among guys that we can easily evaluate. But let's go to James Madison, which obviously has a new head coach in Billy Napier. I'm going to highlight two people here. The quarterback, Arrington Maiden. He was the number 148 quarterback in the 24/7 rankings in the portal via Memphis, and unranked cornerback Dwayne Kelly. Talk about Kelly first. I am going to shout out on this one Bennett Conlin of JMU Sports News, an excellent independent outlet that covers the Dukes. We've had Bennett on the show before. Bennett has a very helpful tracker of James Madison's portal ads and departures, which helped guide me in looking at the way that they were building their roster. Dwayne Kelly, DJ Kelly. Tell me, Richard, if this sounds like anyone that you could remember from the last few years of college football. Comes from Toledo. He's about 6'1", 185. Played as a true freshman. Had an interception, played about 140 snaps. Very highly graded by PFF throughout the year last year, just about every game he played. Played at the Maryland high school powerhouse St. Francis, Baltimore, which I know well, and has 3 years of eligibility left in front of him. I'm reading that, Richard, and I'm getting Quinyon Mitchell style stars in my eyes. They had 2 more DBs drafted this year. Toledo did, including a second round pick in Emmanuel McNeil-Warren, and Audrey Fuller also got picked from Toledo's defense last year. Toledo has had one of the best, most consistent defenses in the group of 5, and just continually seems to find athletes. And also in a lot of cases hang on to them. They did not hang on to this guy, but I'm in on a highly touted rising sophomore who played a lot at Toledo and played well as a true freshman, for sure.
All right, let's talk about and
the quarterback. Don't let me forget him. Arrington Maiden. They're gonna have a quarterback battle. They have Camden Coleman who was in the portal last year, who came from Richmond, good FCS program. They have a couple other guys. Maiden, Arkansas fans will remember because he is the guy who came in at the end of the Memphis Arkansas game last year and basically ran over Arkansas. Like, he came in for one play and just plunged forward for 11 yards to close that game out. We're going to find out just how plug and play James Madison is this year. I'm fascinated by it.
Alonzo Barnett is gone. UCF? We talked about
UCF, yes.
Yeah. Alonzo Barnett is gone. So it's a new room in there at the quarterback situation for James Madison, obviously with the new staff coming in as well. I take Earl Little, safety nickel, going to Ohio State from Florida State. I think that Ohio State is really interesting in its how does Matt Patricia reload this group? I mean, they're replacing like 8 guys, and like 3 of them were Thursday night draft picks. I mean, you know how that goes.
Yep.
So obviously it means Ohio State will bottom out and win 10 games. So, but Little sliding in the back end, especially with the back end that doesn't have Caleb Downs this year to just make everything work, is the thing to watch with Ohio State, especially in that big game against Texas, when they will play a passing offense and the rematch and all the stuff that we will talk about leading into that game. I'm fascinated with how this is going to work in the second year with Matt Patricia at the helm with a less experienced unit, and him really having to redo some stuff there.
Losing Downs is a little bit more interesting than your typical Ohio State departure, just because he is such an outlier player. I remember talking with another program's assistant coach sometime during last season, and he was describing watching Caleb Downs play safety as if it were, from a coaching perspective, like the easiest thing in the world, like setting the AI on easy in the video game. Like, and I'm sure it's not that simple, and Matt Patricia had to tell him some things to do, but like, everyone who's ever evaluated safety play at a high level just says this guy is the best we've seen since before Jamal Adams, probably. The way Saban talks about
him like a son.
Yeah, it's funny. I think you can tell with Saban, and he has a good track record of this, because Saban is a defensive backs guy by trade. Saban used to talk about another player this way. It was Minkah Fitzpatrick.
Yes.
I remember when we were, covering the sport early in our careers, and he talked about Minkah Fitzpatrick that way. And then Minkah Fitzpatrick became a several-time NFL All-Pro. Obviously, Caleb Downs is going to do the same thing. Because Ohio State doesn't have him anymore, just having like a normal, really good safety could present a recognizable drop-off, especially because at that position, it only takes one blown thing to flip a game in the 2 or 3 times a year that Ohio State could actually lose. So I will keep I'm glad you bring this up. I think keeping an eye on the Ohio State back end just because Caleb Downs isn't there I always try to make the season more interesting for myself by imagining ways that Ohio State could collapse and lose 10 games. And yeah, that's one of them, I guess.
Sure.
Yeah.
Give yourself some intrigue.
Yeah. It just introduces more variety to the sport when you can imagine ways in which that would happen. I'm going to take the number 18 offensive tackle in the portal, a transfer from Sam Houston to Washington by the name of Colt Diederich. Last year, Washington, this was, Richard, kind of an odd contradiction, had one of the better offenses in the country. I think they were around top 20 in SP+. They had Damon Williams playing really well at quarterback. They had Jonah Coleman toting the rock. They had Denzel Boston down the field, one of the better receivers in the country. They had a really good offense despite being terrible in pass protection. They were bottom 25 in sack rate allowed and a bunch of other key pressure pass pro indicators. First of all, props to Jed Fish. It's actually impressive and hard to have a good offense when you can't protect your quarterback. Only one team in college football last year, this team, managed to do that. But I don't think you're repeating that trick a second time. I refuse to believe that any program can keep that up over multiple seasons. I don't think any coach is that good, and I don't think Damon Williams is that good. So
you don't? Interesting.
I think he's good, but is he good enough for 2 years in a row to defy physics and gravity with an offensive line that can't protect him? I don't know. Especially not when you take away one of the best running backs in the power conferences and one of the best receivers in the power conferences. Coleman and Boston are both gone now. I think NFL in both of those cases, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think I would remember if they had transferred. Yes, Jonah Coleman is now in the NFL with the Broncos. So the point is, I think Washington has to have a better offensive line this year. I don't think they can get away with it again. So they go and get this Sam Houston tackle, Colt Diederich, and they also at the same time have a 5-star true freshman, Cody Green. And it sounds like it's going to be a camp battle between those two. Generally, you would assume that the upperclassman is probably going to get a little bit more time. At least, they would be hoping that he would win the job to sort of have an easing in period, promote stability. I guess I'm not 100% sure about that, especially when it's a Sam Houston transfer versus a 5-star. But this is a position group that if the high school recruiting and this portal ad, this was one of the best players in Conference USA last year, work out, I think it's a position group that could bounce back for them. Because you remember how great Washington's offensive lines were in those couple of years with Kalen DeBoer? Like how those were really the foundational players on the team that quickly bounced back, the team that made it to the national championship game, multiple highly drafted NFL players, Troy Fautanu, Roger Rosengarten among them in that last year. And then last year, they just kind of sucked at protecting their QB.
Yeah, Diederich I'm really glad you brought him up because I think he is a very interesting sort of treatise for bigger bodies. Sometimes take a little bit of time to fill out, and they take a little bit of time to get used to playing at the college level as they are filling out. Diederich is like a 3-sport guy, played basketball, played baseball.
Interesting.
Yeah, coming into Sam Houston, it's a guy who, when you see that athletic profile, you're like, oh, all right, well, he's probably got great feet. He's probably got pretty decent core strength if you play baseball and football. We can make something shake here. A little bit shaky, as I understand it, the jump to competition, and then obviously becomes an all-conference player. And if you're an all-conference offensive tackle in the G6, brother, the payday is coming. And I imagine that it came for him at Washington.
If the offensive line is good, I'm pretty intrigued about what Washington could look like this year, despite the very weird vibes around the way they ended last season and the episode with Williams trying to leave and being kind of told by some lawyers that he probably shouldn't do that. There is talent throughout this roster. If they can protect the quarterback better, even losing the guys they lost, I think we've tended to treat them as a bit of a forgotten program in the Big Ten the last year or two. It does not have to stay that way. So I'm going to keep an eye on the Huskies. Richard, your next guy.
I'm going to go John Henry Daly, one of a couple players that Kyle Whittingham is bringing with him from Utah to Washington that you just look at and you're like, all right, this is a 12-sack guy last year. The production is there. Huge jump in production for him in his, I believe, his third season at Utah last year. I think this guy comes in the Big Ten, slots into this defense, and you've got a guy coming off the edge that has that's this isn't this like twitched up guy. This is a guy he's a, I don't know if it's undersized, probably isn't the right way to say it, but he's not.
I think I know what you mean though. It's not like he's an insane bendy speed rusher.
Yeah, that's
like
not him.
A&M Von Miller.
But he's not this like thick, like he's also not really that like really big, but in any event, the production is there. It's going to be there in Michigan, I think. And it's going to be fun to see him in the Big Ten.
I mean, you know what he sounds like is a Utah defensive lineman.
Yeah. Yeah,
Just
absolutely.
like solidly built.
I also think he was I need to look this up, but I think he was the rare. Yeah, he was a BYU to Utah guy.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
that's typically a move that coaches make more
Whittingham,
than players.
Whittingham did that.
Yes.
Yeah, he was a BYU to Utah guy. Played his first year at BYU.
Yeah, really good player. He was a Walter Camp first team, AP second team All-American last year. Also, obviously, all Big 12. He might be the most slam dunky guy on your list for me. Richard, I'm making a conscious effort here to try to stay lower in the rankings than you to cover as much as I can, but I am going to go to the top here and talk about a couple of LSU guys. Jordan Seaton, the number 1 offensive tackle in the portal, and Alu Ba, the number 5 interior offensive lineman, comes from Maryland to LSU. I did want to pick the low-hanging fruit here, sort of because it gives an opportunity to think back a bit to last LSU season. I think that I forgot how shitty their offensive line was last season. I think I knew intuitively that it wasn't very good and that Nussmeier not being entirely healthy had a little bit maybe to do with the duress he was under. But if you look at the numbers, I mean, it's kind of gross how bad they were last year. No roads were being graded in the run game, let's just say.
I remember
they were victims of a 24% stuff rate running the ball. That's second worst in the P4 after Michigan State. It was ugly. They could not get the ball past the line of scrimmage reliably.
I remember watching them. They played the week before they played Florida. They played Louisiana Tech. And I remember like that game was a slog for them. Like way more than it should have been. And then they go out against Florida, who I can't even remember if Caleb Banks was playing in that game or not. But I remember mightily struggling, and that was the game DJ Lagway threw whatever 5 picks or whatever, and LSU failed. Failed to blow them off the face of the earth at home, which is what you do when a team throws 5 interceptions against you. And part of it was because they struggled to as you're saying, to move the ball, to get the ball to basket. And I think some of that is because that offensive line. I mean, the Clemson game. If you want to take the whole beginning part of that season, sort of as the Clemson game was horrible, and that was where you're like, oh well, these two teams are going to be great. Play defensive struggle.
Blah, blah, blah,
it's first
week of the year.
Look at the back end that LSU had, and we sort of overlooked it. But no, the offensive line became a feature, not a bug. Regrettably,
very much so. It was ugly all year. I don't think they ever replaced. I mean, I know they never replaced Will Campbell, who was the left tackle who went to the Patriots, where he learned about the difficulty in jump and competition level between the SEC and the NFL. Honestly, he's a perfect example. He gave some really introspective quotes, Campbell did actually, about how hard it is to become an NFL offensive lineman. Felt for him watching him just get torched in the Super Bowl. And it was almost enough to forget how important he was to the times where it actually looked kind of okay for Brian Kelly at LSU. It was not okay last year. You get 2 obvious plug and play guys. Seaton is going to hug Roger Goodell, not just on Thursday night, but probably in the first hour of Thursday night come next April.
Yeah.
Ba is an NFL prospect himself. I think that Sam Leavitt is going to be the most, for obvious reasons, ballyhooed, marketed LSU transfer this year. He's the most important one in a vacuum, yes, but LSU could have gotten any of the top 10 portal quarterbacks, and I think my posture on them going into this year would be pretty much the same. If you swapped Sam Leavitt for pick your portal quarterback who was pretty good, no disrespect to him, but having these 2 guys, I think makes me not just more optimistic, but makes it seem really fair to put a lot more pressure on Lane Kiffin in the first year. Think about the last time there was a situation like this. To me, would have been Lincoln Riley's first year at USC in 2022.
Yeah, he was not stepping into a roster that looks like this.
No, it's particularly on the offensive line. Like yes, they got Caleb Williams, who won the Heisman, and they got Jordan Addison, Biletnikoff winning receiver. No one is saying that USC didn't money up and get a good roster together. But LSU didn't skip the foundation here. So these two guys are a big part of the reason why there will be no excuses for not immediately being really good. Like, better win 9, should at least be in the playoff hunt until the very end, probably should make the playoff, or else it seems like kind of a flop because of the good work that they did in the portal.
Yeah, I'm going to go. So the thing with LSU is I am interested in how Seton operates in this offense and if it becomes a thing during his draft prep. I don't think it will be. Like, I don't think it becomes a big deal at all.
What do you mean?
But and I don't think it becomes a big deal because we've seen him play at Colorado pretty well in a different style of offense. But in the way that I think Kiffin quarterbacks are dinged, part of me wonders if Kiffin offensive linemen are also dinged because of the RPOE nature of the offense, all that sort of stuff. It's just a harebrained thing for me more than something I've like reported out or heard. It's just I wonder sort of thing with him. I doubt it's going to happen because you've already seen the talent from him in 2 years at Colorado, but just monitoring.
Do you think that there's an offensive tackle version of skepticism on quarterback prospects because they ran too many RPOs, like the knock was on Tua? Yeah,
I wouldn't say it's a tackle thing. I would say it's more an offense. I think it's offensive line writ large. I think that there is some, because I do think some people overstate the dearth of offensive line play in the NFL. It's hard. But I do think that some of it has to do with the RPOification of the game, with the spreadification of the game. And, we're going on 15 years of this now. So it's not like this is new. I think we've probably talked about offensive line winnowing away, or offensive line play winnowing away, for as long as modern football discourse has been happening, because we've been talking about quarterback play winnowing away for as long as football discourse has been happening.
Richard, take me to the rest of your list.
I'm going to go the full position group here. Do you know who Oklahoma's tight end coach is, Alex?
I do, because someone was recently in their football office and informed me that they saw this guy. And I was like, wait, he didn't play there. What's the deal? I do know this. I will let you tell everyone, but this was a fun one.
Former Dallas Cowboy and Tennessee Volunteer Jason Witten is the tight ends coach at Oklahoma. So why I think the Oklahoma tight ends room is so interesting is because if you're not really aware of what's happening in the NFL right now from a personnel standpoint, so you had this, if you want to take over the last 15 years is probably a decent time, maybe 20 years, you had offenses get lighter, right? You have all this stuff where we're spreading guys out and we're not doing the I form, but the fullback is now extinct. All this stuff. That's kind of the clearest example, right? So offenses do that. And then what do defenses do? Well, defenses then get lighter in the ass too. And so you're taking a linebacker off the field and you're putting in sometimes a tweener, but sometimes an all out third corner or fifth defensive back player, and you're running nickel. So you're lighter in the ass, and it doesn't hurt you because offensive personnel is not heavy enough to exploit the lack of mass you have as a defense on the field. That's coming back the other way. The clearest example at the NFL level, it's coming back the other way. The clearest example is the Rams. The Rams ran an amount of 13 personnel, 1 running back, and three tight ends last year. That is frankly stunning. Like it's
sure is.
nuts.
McVay's a sick individual.
Yes, dude. McVay is sick in the head for the shit that they did last year with 13 personnel. And I'm having a conversation about this because I'm sure that you have noticed, if you paid attention to the NFL draft, that the Jags took multiple tight ends, one of which everybody thinks they took way too early. And the second they did it, because where Liam Cohen, head coach, and James Gladstone, GM, came from, I said, they're doing a Rams thing. It's very clear. The Rams used 13 personnel. This was it's one of his games, one of the games they played last year. The Rams used 13 personnel on 30 of their 67 offensive plays, the second highest rate in an NFL game since 2016.
Yeah.
It's nuts how the Rams are doing this. So, I think the NFL, copycat league, starting to follow suit a little bit.
Oh, they are. Yeah.
You're starting to see it. And
did you see who my guys gave an eight-figure guarantee to last week? They're like backup / occasional number 3 tight end, Darnell Washington.
I got to get heavier. Get heavier. And I did wonder, would this come around in college at all? Or when will this come around in college? Well, wholesale upturn of the Oklahoma tight end room. Hayden Hansen in from Florida, Rocky Beers in from Colorado State, and Jack Van Dorselaer in. 3 new tight ends. I cannot wait to see what Oklahoma is able to do with its tight end room this season, if they are actually really going to try and go kind of, all systems go into a heavier heavier day on offense.
By the way, with Jason Witten, if you were thinking to yourself, as I was, what was he doing between the doomed stint in the broadcast booth and now? I don't remember him being a coach of another college football team. You're right. He has been coaching high school ball in Texas since 2021 and gets brought out here to be Oklahoma's tight ends coach. Obviously qualified, not suggesting even for a second otherwise, but it's just, he's had an interesting journey. Jason Witten has. I mean, played for a very long time. He's still just 44. He's not very old. He could have a long coaching career ahead of him, but sort of just disappeared off the face of the earth after the experience that did not go the way he wanted in the Fox broadcast booth. And actually, I think as a matter of fact, he came back for another year or two at the end of his NFL career. After that, played for the Raiders for a moment during the COVID season.
Oh,
and
I actually forgot about that.
So did I. In case people can't tell, but if you're watching on our YouTube channel at College Football Podcast on YouTube, subscribe, by the way, great way to support the show. You will see me looking to my right to check his Wikipedia. He came back for a minute right after he had gone to the broadcast booth. Weird journey. And now he's at I don't know about a conference rival, but a conference opponent of his alma mater, Tennessee.
They have played a couple weird games. Like Brent Venables put the book out on how to stop the offense a couple years ago in Norman. Last year, R. Mason Thomas runs that fumble back and tear his quad or whatever it was in that game.
Yeah, they've had some odd moments. Yeah, they've had some odd moments for sure. I am going to do another position group here. This one actually is going to get pretty close to the top of the rankings, but only for a moment. The Texas Tech defensive line thing this year. All commentary on Texas Tech's most notable transfer, the quarterback, will be in a bio chamber. It will not be accessed during this episode.
It's on the feed. It's on the Split Zone.
It's in the splitzone.com feed. If you want about a 45-minute, I really enjoyed it, in my opinion, pretty explanatory interview with Sam Ehrlich, who is a college sports litigation tracker, assistant professor at Boise State's College of Business and Economics, and just very smart about the stuff. We talked a lot about what the Sorsby thing means, where it might be going. Who knows when the next development in that case will come down, but you can listen to that. I want to talk about the Texas Tech defense. Last year, I think that Texas Tech's haul in the portal on the defensive line may have been the most successful position group haul in the portal era's history. Yes? David Bailey, Romello Height opposite him?
Sure. I mean, in any event, I will give Texas Tech credit. They buy players who can play.
Yes.
And they buy big guys.
Yes.
Who can play.
Absolutely.
And that's not as easy as people think it is.
And also, I forget, I don't even mention a defensive tackle who was also a portal ad last year, Lee Hunter from UCF, who became a great player for them and played himself into being a second round pick in the NFL draft by the Panthers. All those guys are playing in the NFL now. Bailey was a early lottery pick was it the Jets? Who took David Bailey?
Jets, I think. Can't remember.
NFL podcast, as always. Anyway, they are running it back. They just have a new crop in. They have the number 1 interior defensive lineman in the portal. That is Mateen Igbaragba from Wake Forest. And then they have the number 20 and number 33 edges. Here, I think they're playing a little bit more money ball, actually, with their edge rushers. So they have Adam Trick from Miami University and Trey White from San Diego State. That's a little different than last year, where David Bailey pops into the portal after Stanford's coach gets in trouble and gets fired. And suddenly in the spring, you just have an obvious game wrecker available to you. And Texas Tech went and got him. These are not, in the case of the 2 edge rushers, the same kind of slam dunk. I think Igbaragba is definitely the Hunter replacement and will be good in the middle of that line. But Trick and White, I think, combined last year for 15.5 sacks in the MAC and in the Mountain West. White has had even more prolific seasons in his past. He had 2 years ago, Trey White had massive numbers for San Diego State. I think he was around like 20 sacks 2 years ago for the Aztecs, 12.5 sacks, 18.5 tackles for loss 2 years ago. So like they have some proven production here, but unlike last year with Romello Height, who had been at, I think, 3 power conference schools before, and David Bailey, who was dominant at Stanford, this is not just an obvious situation where you get these guys and you're going to have one of the best pass rushes in the country, because you have like a big quality of competition step that you didn't when you were getting guys from other power conference programs who probably cost more to get than these guys did. So they are playing a bit of money ball on the edges. That could work. I think you not only do you have to get players who can play, but you have to be somewhat creative about how you deploy your budget, even if you got a big one. And they're doing that this year on the defensive line.
I'm going to go offensive line. I'm going to go Xavier Chaplin at Florida State by way of Auburn, by way of Virginia Tech originally for him. Xavier Chaplin is kind of another part of this kind of woe-begotten Auburn 2025 offensive thing. You had Hugh Freeze coming out before the season saying that they had 6 offensive linemen who could go to the NFL. Jackson Arnold trotted out there at quarterback, and you had that Auburn offensive line have, absolute howlers, namely the Oklahoma game where, what was it, 10 sacks, 11 sacks, including like 9, a game-ending safety.
Including a game-ending one that was the moment that I think everyone stopped believing in the Jackson Arnold thing, was him getting torpedoed by a guy who was rushing, I believe, from the side he was looking at to end that game, but don't quote me. Yeah, it was ugly. It was a terrible sordid affair.
You had a player in Chaplin who they found out, but at least announced halfway through the season that he's like partially deaf. Like he has a hearing issue, and it was causing him to not be able to hear the snap count at some points in time. And he was having a false start issue.
Yeah. I remember that. I remember that also because Hugh Freeze explained it in a press conference and was so clearly trying to explain it in a way that wouldn't sound like he was doing what he always does, which is throw his players under the bus. I remember this well.
Yeah. So for Chaplin, I think, and Chaplin is going into a Florida State offensive line that, gee, I bet you can't guess, is pretty heavily portaled. So I think Chaplin is in a group of players for Florida State that I think, as we can all guess, Mike Norvell's ass is on the line here. Mike Norvell is back calling plays here. And I think Chaplin specifically can do a lot to rescue what last year did to draft stock, career aspirations, et cetera, et cetera.
Could I devil's advocate this thing about Mike Norvell for 1 second?
Please.
Is his job on the line? I assume so, but if last year didn't do it, if they're just broke.
Last year was we don't want to pay the buyout. We're going to try to run it back and pump money in the roster and give them a bunch of new front office. My biggest thing is, to be honest with you, I don't know if the AD is going to get through another 5 and 7 season.
No,
with Mike Norvell is what I'm saying.
Very fair. I assume, I don't mean to overly devil's advocate this, but the fact that he's even still here at all is just still a little bit funny to me. Elsewhere in the Atlantic Coast Conference, such as it is, I want to highlight the Cal wide receiver room. This was one that our friend Bill Connolly highlighted some weeks ago before we had him on the program to talk about returning production and his favorite portal classes. Chase Hendricks is a 1,000-yard receiver from Ohio, which longtime listeners will know I was a big fan of their offense last year with Parker Navarro at quarterback. They beat West Virginia. They had a fun team. He gets the power conference bump here. They also get Ian Strong from Rutgers, who was a relatively bright light in some really disgusting Rutgers offenses in recent seasons.
Remember,
I mean, you know what I'm talking about.
Was it last year was it last year or was it the year before where we were like, hey, Rutgers is passing like a lot?
Yeah. It not especially successfully.
Yeah.
Although actually last year, the quarterback who I was hard on, Ethan Kaliakmanis, actually improved. He had a better year. So I'm not going to say it was all on him. But the Rutgers offense has just not really been a joy to watch, I wouldn't say. And Ian Strong goes to play for Tosh Lapoy here at Cal. Gets what I'm going to say is just a slight quarterback upgrade to Jaren Kiave Sangapulotele. I tend to think that any of these guys going to Cal are major breakout candidates, could be all ACC type people now that they are in this offense. They also have a transfer from New Mexico, a program that we like, Dorian Thomas, a tight end, and a couple of other running back, tight end guys. Tosh, just pretty quickly, I say Tosh, I also mean Ron Rivera. I mean, the whole apparatus at Cal, they really share the thing there, has done, to my eye, a pretty good job just getting people in the door, and we'll see who sticks over the course of this season. But Cal is going to be, this year, Richard, I mean, they got onto this a little bit last year. Cal is going to be a deeply enjoyable late night capper for your college football Saturdays this year. Can they defend anything? I don't know. We'll cover that in preview season. We'll probably be wrong. We'll come back to it in mid-September, but there will be offensive fireworks with that team this year. There will be aesthetics that are fun to watch. There will be balls being thrown very far down the field and being caught by people. And Cal fans, you deserve that. I think this will be fun.
All right, I'm going to go for my next guy. I'm going to take Hosea Wheeler. He's a defensive lineman from Indiana that I'm kind of shocked they let him leave, which means I imagine Baylor really threw the bag at him. But yeah, I'm pretty surprised that Hosea Wheeler was allowed out the door.
He joins a team that had the second worst sack rate in the Power Four last year, Baylor. He's not an edge rusher, but obviously having good defensive tackles, interior guys, also helps you get pressure on the quarterback for obvious reasons. Baylor, I love this for Baylor. Sometimes now that we've been blessed to do the show for long enough, I catch myself in show prep thinking about my hobby horses and players' situations that I've remembered over the years. And I think I've probably said a version of this at least 5 times, which is that Baylor just really got soft in the middle of their defensive line after that Big 12 championship season when they had that guy Siaki Ika as their defensive tackle, who was the foundation of that defense. They just have never fixed it. It's been like, 3 or 4 years now of just them being very malleable on the defensive line. And this guy will help. So nice job, Baylor. Great get. I'm sure we'll get a text from some Indiana sources after this explaining that there was a reason that Sig let him go or something. But
I look forward to hearing about it. I don't know if I'd have to look. Wheeler was not one of the James Madisons that came with. He was not at James Madison. He was at Western Kentucky before. He got to Indiana. He actually got to Indiana in 2025.
Oh, interesting. He was so he was in his first year with them last year. Good get. Optimistic get for Baylor. We'll see if they can figure it out in the run-stopping game this year. Richard, here is my last guy on my list. This is a running back, Rodney Nelson, who is transferring from Monmouth in FCS to Miami University. That's the one in Oxford, Ohio. You can find our Dead Letters episode about the history of the Miami University football program if you just scroll down in your feed or go to splitzoneduo.com. That's not why I put them here, though. I didn't do it for the plug. Miami splashed some cash this offseason. Reporting from your colleague Chris Hummer at CBS Sports indicates that. Much innuendo in college football circles indicates that, though we don't have specifics. I believe Chris reported that it was in the upper 7 figures for a roster budget, which for a MAC team is not small. And I would say that outside of the good American jobs and Boise State, James Madison, I don't know how many G6 teams are spending more than roughly what Miami is spending this year.
If you're pushing more than $5 million as a G6, as one of those G6 teams,
yeah,
all right, cool. You got my
if you're not one of the teams, I mean, if you're not one of the teams that could win the American or Boise or James Madison, someone like that, that is a ton of money. So one of the players that they got, though I don't know about the specifics of his deal, is this running back Rodney Nelson from Monmouth. This guy ran for 2,600 yards the last 2 years. He was just the CAA Offensive Player of the Year on a 9-win team. He is 5'8", 195. His playing style is what you would think it would be based on that size. Miami pretty famously just gets drubbed in the portal every year. They've been a good developmental program that just gets picked clean. We already mentioned Adam Trick, the edge rusher from that team, who's on to Texas Tech this year. This has happened to them a lot, probably even more than your median pretty good G6 over the last few years. But they, at Miami, have done a good job, not just crying about it and wallowing, but, you know, understanding that there is a food chain and that there are also schools that they can pluck from. And so they have this guy from Monmouth, which has produced a lot of good ball players in recent years. Monmouth has kind of been, and this is maybe why it caught my eye, a bit of the Miami of FCS in terms of just losing good player after good player after good player who makes the jump. I'm counting at least 7 this year from Monmouth who got FBS looks or FBS roster spots. That includes the Offensive Player of the Year, who I just mentioned. That includes the CAA Defensive Rookie of the Year, Lamont Lester, goes to Colorado with Dion. He's a defensive lineman. That includes an FCS All-American wide receiver, Josh Derry, who goes to UCF. This has been happening to Monmouth for a while, since like early portal era. I remember Tony Muskett, Big South, one of the best quarterbacks in FCS a couple years back, went to UVA. Monmouth might be the most rated program in Division One. I don't know if I can scientifically prove that. I don't
think you can scientifically prove
but I know we got a Monmouth Hawk listener somewhere. I'd love to hear what it's like to be a fan of the Monmouth football program right now, because they are getting picked over.
One of the greats, Emery Hunt, does a lot of Monmouth broadcasts. Works with me in CBS Sports. He's with me on a lot of Saturdays. That's my guy. He's always talking to Monmouth to me in the studio. When we're
sure. Miami, by the way, has had some success with FCS skill guys up. That's been part of why they've been good the last few years. So I'm betting that this is going to be another one of those guys. If you are looking for interesting players to watch in the MAC this year, the running back Rodney Nelson, who comes to Miami from Monmouth. Richard, you got one or two more for us?
Yeah, I got 2 more quickly on another ton of 2-position guy. Promise that didn't really go well last year. Smith Snowden is coming in again with Kyle Whittingham to Michigan on the back end. Just a player to look for. Interested player, wildly athletic. I think like he's a guy who is not necessarily going to be like this interception maven, but like is just one of those physical Utah corners that just gets the job done. I mean, there's just no 2 ways about it. So for Michigan, I'm interested in that. And then the other one, my 10th one here, Colton Joseph, quarterback. I only took one quarterback. I haven't taken many quarterbacks, but we didn't want to take a bunch of quarterbacks on this, but I did take one. Colton Joseph, who goes from Old Dominion to Wisconsin. All right, Luke. All right, let's see it, big fella. Because I am really interested in how Colton Joseph changes the identity of what Wisconsin's going to do on offense. Because let me tell you, you are not dropping Colton Joseph back there to just sit there like a sitting duck. He is going to move. And if he's able to show his skills here for Wisconsin, they could be really fun. I mean, this is a bona fide 1,000-yard rusher at quarterback.
He did more damage to the Indiana Hoosiers in 2025 than any other player in college football.
On a broken play, sources will tell you.
He troubled them really badly. He's got one of those wild stat profiles too, where he is a running quarterback, but also in terms of like depth of targets and the percentage of his throws that are well down the field, he's one of the most aggressive quarterbacks in the country. Old Dominion and Ricky Ronnie like really turned him loose
Yeah, that offense was Tennessee adjacent
Yeah.
in the last couple of years.
I don't know if it's going to work, but I mean, I want to compare the way we were talking about Wisconsin last year at this time when it was like, oh my God, dude, they're going to start Billy Edwards at quarterback. Like, why do we have to sit through this? This has my attention. Also, Edwards is now going to play for North Carolina. So North Carolina, you're in that position now. But Wisconsin will, if they're not going to be good, they'll be a more fun kind of bad this year. And that's something. That's something.
It may not be enough, but it is something.
Yes, it is. Richard Johnson, that has been, I'll count it up after we get the transcript for the show. That's what, the 24 to 26 most interesting transfers in college football going into 2026? Do you have a favorite of the group?
25 is a good college football number, top 25 poll, etc. 24 also may unfortunately be a really good college football number here in the next couple months if the powers that be continue. But 26 for 26, let's make a decision here. And you, the listening audience, will see when the title of the episode comes out.